From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Hurricane Ian still doing horrific damage in Florida as we tape this program, and could do, in fact, a second landfall in South Carolina in the coming days. Can Joe Biden and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis cooperate to mutual benefit regarding the handling of this hurricane? And what about hurricanes and climate change? Plus, Russia annexes 4 territories it occupies in Ukraine after phony referendums saying that the people there wanted to join Russia, while the U.S. agrees to send more military aid to Ukraine. And NATO says a pipeline with Russian gas intended for Europe was sabotaged. Who's winning in these latest fronts in the Ukraine-Russia war? Welcome. I'm Paul Gigot with the Wall Street Journal editorial page, and here with Kim Strassel and Jillian Melcher. Welcome to you both. Let's first talk about the hurricane. Of course, we don't know the extent of the damage still unfolding. It's certainly severe from all the pictures, just horrifying. And particularly, we don't yet know the number of people who will have died or been injured here, and we have to find that out, and we will. And our thoughts, of course, go to all the people who are enduring this. We also don't know exactly what the consequences will be. We have an election coming up, obviously. Ron DeSantis is on the ballot. Historically, Kim, hurricanes have been able to do great harm to politicians depending on how they handle it. Of course, Katrina in 2005 being the classic example, but also can be a significant benefit if you are seen to be handling it well. The example there to mutual benefit, Chris Christie, governor of New Jersey, and Barack Obama in 2012 on the cusp of that election, the so-called hug, as the two met each other. It was really more like a close handshake between Obama and Christie after Superstorm Sandy. Christie widely criticized by some Republicans for seeming to get too close to Obama. On the other hand, it really helped Christie in his reelection the next year, and I bet arguably helped Obama too. I mean, I hate to get political here when the storm is still doing damage, but talk a little bit about that.
Well, right now, I guess we'll have to see how this turns out for both of them, but I think there's the opportunity for this to be mutually beneficial to both of them. One interesting thing about watching DeSantis do this is he's become known on the national stage very much as a political pugilist, taking shots at Democrats, really being a spokesperson for Republican causes. He's had a very different look this week, very much the executive in charge, very serious, grave, and so far is coming across as competent. On the other side, Biden started to potentially make a misstep there because he got some flack. He had talked to a number of mayors in Florida, but had not called DeSantis. And there was a lot of questions about that. Then he finally did. And according to the White House, it was all cordial, and he has pledged all the help he can give. He's also made a major disaster declaration. That seems to me more the right move for the White House, to look generous and helpful rather than to allow politics to get in the way here. We'll see if that remains. I think the real risk for DeSantis is he needs to show himself to be competent in this, because otherwise he risks double damage, not just failing to help Florida, but looking as though he's really more of a talker than a doer, and that could harm him in his reelection.
All right, Kim, we shall watch. Now, just a word on climate change and hurricanes. Of course, the inevitable happened. I saw an AP story immediately upon the arrival of Hurricane Ian linking this serious storm, and it is a serious storm, something like the in terms of wind, 4th most serious hurricane to hit Florida in the modern era, with 150-mile-an-hour hurricane winds. And the AP story and others saying, just shows you what climate change. I just want to read from the UN report, latest report, IPCC on climate change. Quote, there is still no consensus on the relative magnitude of human and natural influences on past changes in Atlantic Ocean hurricane activity, and particularly on which factor has dominated the observed increase. And it remains uncertain whether past changes in Atlantic hurricane activity are outside the range of natural variability. That's bureaucratic prose for saying we don't know what the link is between climate and hurricanes, and there's actually no real confidence, even low confidence, among all different scientists about that link. Jillian, that won't stop people from making the link.
Yeah, that's right. I think this is just a really good example of some of the journalistic malpractice that happens around climate science in general. If you were to read the headlines, you would think you could draw a direct line from climate change to this particular hurricane. But I just think when you look at even what some of these scientists, capital scientists, are saying, they're not that certain about it. So I just think the media does not do a good job of covering this, and it's something that the public should be aware of.
There is some evidence that maybe the severity of tropical cyclones, typhoons in the Pacific, and hurricanes might be increasing because of climate change, but not the frequency, but less confidence in an increase in frequency. All right. We'll follow these debates as they go. Let's move on to Ukraine and lots of developments there with regarding Russia's annexation of these territories in Ukraine that it occupies, but nobody else is recognizing other than the Russia's clients and various rogue states. But what difference is this annexation, Jillian, going to make on the ground, if any?
Well, so I think what Putin's trying to do here is potentially set up the circumstances for claiming that this is part of Russia, and that would allow him to potentially escalate by saying that any attempt by Ukraine to take back this territory, this occupied territory, is an attack on Russia. And so he's using that in conjunction with renewing his nuclear threats. And I think the attempt here is to intimidate the West. The West is completely right, by the way, in not acknowledging the legitimacy of these annexations. I mean, I was looking at polling that happened before the war, where only 21% of residents in Kherson, 32% of residents in Zaporizhia, those are two of the annexed territories, had warm attitudes toward Russia. And that was before the Russian soldiers began bombing Ukrainian cities, killing Ukrainian civilians. So it's not legitimate, and it's good to see the West not accept this. But I do think that's what Putin is trying to do. He also needs to have a victory for back home that's potentially also aimed at a domestic audience.
Yeah, I think you're right. I guess Kim, there is the risk of also much speculation that possibly Putin is doing this to be able to drive home the threat that he has made about the potential use of nuclear weapons in defense of the Russian homeland, claiming that these territories are part of the Russian homeland, and therefore he is justified in using nuclear weapons. Of course, that decision, no matter whether those territories are annexed or not, with enormous consequences and very negative consequences for Russia as well. So that would still be a very, very high-risk strategy.
Yeah, this came via a statement he made in which he said that Russia reserved the right to, quote, use all the means at our disposal, end quote, to keep territorial integrity. And so that's clearly what this is aimed at. And the risk, I think, escalates, although it's interesting. A lot of people who follow this still remain skeptical he would do it because of all the complications involved, not just the potential for backlash and some sort of counterstrike potentially by NATO or others, the escalation of this, but also the problems just simply involved in using a nuclear or radiological weapon on the ground where his own troops are. It doesn't sound as though the Russian army is prepared to actually handle that themselves. One more thing that I would note that I think is maybe behind this territorial annexation, because it's very Putin-like and it's very cynical. Watch this space, but there's a lot of belief that as soon as this is formalized, that the order will go out to conscript Ukrainians from these territories to serve in the Russian army, essentially use Ukrainians themselves as cannon fodder in part of this effort. And also think of it as psychologically, maybe perhaps make the Ukrainian army a little bit more reluctant to attack what they would know would be Ukrainian citizens. So given the difficulties Putin is having with this partial mobilization he has announced, they're high betting that that is an order that comes next.